The racist backlash against Barack Obama's election. Civil rights groups say hate crimes are on the rise. Even as America shows how far it's come, some ethnic minorities continue to suffer prejudice and violence. So what now for equality in the US? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. The election of Barack Obama as the first black president of the United States has been hailed as the beginning of a post-civil rights era. But since his historic victory, there has been a disturbing backlash. According to statistics gathered by civil rights groups, there's been a rise in race-hate crime across America. Hundreds of incidents of violence and vandalism against ethnic minorities have been reported since Election Day. Burning crosses and black effigies hanging from nooses have been found. Obscene messages and death threats against Obama have been made, and at least one black man was beaten up while his attackers shouted Obama's name. And there's been a worrying rise in the actions of white supremacy groups in the run-up to the election. Last month, 2 white supremacists were arrested in Tennessee. They'd allegedly been planning to behead 14 African Americans and shoot Barack Obama. Well, according to the anti-discrimination organisation, the Southern Poverty Law Centre, there were almost 900 active race-hate groups in America last year. Groups like the Council of Conservative Citizens and the notorious Ku Klux Klan, which is now made up of several independent outfits. So what do they want and what do they stand for? Well, these far-right-wing organisations differ in parts of their ideology, but they all share some basic beliefs. First, that the US was founded as a white Christian nation and it should remain so. Some consider whites superior by nature. Others want non-whites to return to the country of their ancestors. They all vehemently oppose non-white immigration and racial integration, fearing the loss of their white Christian heritage. Some groups advocate the use of violence, but most researchers say the movement's edged away from activities like burning crosses, instead using the media to spread their message. Well, to discuss these issues, let me introduce my guests. In New York, Manning Marable, Professor of African American Studies and Director for the Center for Contemporary Black History at Columbia University. In Washington, D.C., Alan Lichtman, an American political historian and professor at American University in Washington, D.C. And also in Washington, D.C., Hilary Shelton, Director for the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, or the NNACP, Washington Bureau. Hilary, let me start with you first. What's your evidence showing you about race-hate crimes in the run-up to and since Obama's election?
We've gotten a number of accounts from throughout the country, in places like Illinois, in places like Mississippi, South Carolina, and other places where African Americans have had nasty messages shouted at them, and very racially driven. We've seen and heard from our friends in New York where people have been beaten up, as a matter of fact, by gangs of young white men. So indeed, there is a problem going on right now. We're seeing a spike, quite frankly, in hate crimes. Sadly and unfortunately, African Americans are still the largest victims of hate crimes in the United States, as they're reported to the Department of Justice. So we're hearing not only the anecdotes, the real stories, but we're also seeing the statistics bearing out that we're experiencing a spike right now.
Manning, why is this? Isn't this surprising, given Obama's victory? I mean, the rest of the world is lauding America as being the pinnacle of equality now.
The two decisive questions we have to ask are, how did Obama win? And secondly, what's the racial meaning of his victory? If one thinks about the November election as a three-legged stool, Obama's victory came about because of 3 constituent elements. 95% of all African Americans voted for him, and there was a massive increase in black turnout, so that 1 out of every 7 votes cast in this election were cast by African Americans. Latinos voted 2-to-1 in favor of Obama. And then finally, voters between the ages of 18 to 29 years of age, 44 million Americans, voted 60% for Obama. So that about a third of the American electorate voted between 60 to 90% for Barack Obama. That's basically the vast majority of people of color, and younger Americans who represent the future of the country. And so consequently, there is a tremendous degree of anxiety on the part of white supremacist organizations who see the country of white supremacy slipping away from them.
Okay, Alan, let me bring you in. Do you agree with that? Do you think Obama and the focus on his colour has energized white supremacist groups?
No question about it. No progress comes without its reaction. When we had the first Catholic run for president in 1928, Governor of New York Al Smith, there was a tremendous anti-Catholic reaction, an enormous revival of anti-Catholicism in the United States as well. I'd like to draw two distinctions, though. One is we have still not really come together as one nation racially. We are not yet in the post-civil rights era when it comes to things like health care, job opportunities, access to credit, police behavior. There is still not equality between white America and black America. When it comes to wealth and
are we not
income,
on the road to that now that Barack Obama is in charge?
Well, that remains to be seen. The mere election of Barack Obama does not close that gap and does not solve those problems. Those are problems that Barack Obama now has to address, along with all these other problems.
Hillary, I just want to ask...
There's another distinction.
I mean, Barack...
If I may, real quick, and that is between the hate groups, the skinheads...
Sorry, Alan, finish your point.
Yeah, just real quick. There's a real distinction to be made between the skinheads, the survivalists, Ku Klux Klan remnants that tend to violence, and those who are opposed to civil rights and opposed to black progress, but who are not necessarily inclined towards violence. And both of those groups need to be dealt with.
Well, Hillary, I wanted to ask you about those groups. I mean, are there any statistics? I mean, is their membership increasing? Is their ideology gaining ground?
Well, let me just say that history has always shown us that whenever the economy is at its worst, and of course Barack Obama is winning this election with the backdrop of our economy being at an all-time low, that very well hate groups begin to spiral, they begin to grow. They begin to scapegoat, as a matter of fact. So it's not surprising that we're seeing that the targets of hate are immigrants coming in from Latin American countries that can be very easily identified, being pinpointed and scapegoated as one of the reasons that jobs are being lost. But very well, it is our economy that has very well failed us. So it's not surprising. And again, African Americans have always been part of that scapegoating that happens when America's not working very well. And in this particular case, what we have is now an African American being lifted up to serve as president of the United States with that same backdrop. It is not a coincidence that the Ku Klux Klan just opened an office in Detroit, Michigan, a city that's predominantly African American, but also a city that's experiencing a major economic downfall because of the automobile industry. So white American workers are losing their jobs along with everyone else. Those are the people that the Klan goes in the target for new members for their recruitment.
Okay.
So it's not surprising.
So it's not surprising. How do we combat this? Manning, I mean, if I can play devil's advocate, if one of the fears of these groups is that they are going to be disadvantaged because of the large numbers of non-white people there, how do you combat that and turn it against itself so it's not a threat to them and it doesn't end up in violence and hatred?
Well, I think that the Obama administration is committed to a massive public works initiative, a so-called New Deal, to put millions of Americans back to work. And the best way to counter fear, especially that's driven by the dire economy, is for the administration to take charge on the 20th of January. But I want to make another point. One of the dilemmas that the Obama administration has is that Obama did not run for president as a black candidate. He ran as a remarkably gifted politician who recognized that white America probably would not elect a black man as president, but they would elect a gifted politician who happened to be black. So that his campaign's orientation was not race-based. It focused on public policy, And he tried to construct
but
and
a lot of the media
did,
coverage was
center-
race-based. Alan, I know you want to come in here. A lot of the media coverage was race-based.
Yeah. Let me continue this point, though,
They
and it's really
continue to
critical.
bring it in, yes.
We are not going to solve race hatred by improving the economy. I'm all for improving the economy. I think that's great. But the height of the Ku Klux Klan, when it had 3 to 5 million members, really literally hundreds of times the membership today, was in the middle of the 1920s, one of the most prosperous periods in the history of the country, and in the Great Depression of the 1930s, the worst economic period, the Klan was at one of its low ebbs. Hatred has its own logic independent of the economy, unfortunately,
but the
and
hatred,
must be
gentlemen,
fought on its own grounds.
It's not widespread, is it? I mean, the Ku Klux Klan, it's got, what, 5,000 members?
It's not widespread at all, but that's the sad thing about hate. A few small extremists willing to commit violence can cause mayhem and distress to the whole society far beyond their numbers.
So, Hillary, is this a flash in the pan?
Right.
Is it just a knee-jerk reaction, or does it start as something sinister?
Well, I think that there's a lot of a disconnect right now in our nation. There are a number of things happening. We shouldn't give these hate mongers the benefit of assuming that they're somehow extremely well connected, because they're not. They're tied by essential ideology, but they're acting independently. So you have the case, as you mentioned earlier, in Tennessee, where 2 white supremacist skinheads decided that they wanted to plan to massacre a number of African Americans before trying to assassinate the new African American president of the United States. So indeed, we know those problems are still here, but we also know that they're not as well connected as some would like to believe. The economy does play a major role in being able to thwart new recruits. There are people who are confused, that are looking for an out. They're trying to understand why it is that they played by the rules, they did what their parents told them to do, they married their high school sweetheart, and they worked on the assembly line at the General Motors, Ford, or Chrysler factory, and now they're finding themselves trying to figure out how to take care of their families. They're looking for answers. When hate mongers come in and say the problem is those Latin American immigrants coming to the country, the problem is those African Americans benefiting from affirmative action, the problem is they're letting your job go, hardworking white man, because they want to protect racial and ethnic minorities, or Jews in many cases, then indeed those particular arguments have to be responded to. The economy helps, but he's right, hate moves in its own way in many ways as well. Okay, gentlemen, we just have to take a very short break right now, but when we come back, what does Obama's election mean for the civil rights movement? Could it actually undermine their goals? Stay with us.